Hello everyone, my name is Emily Louie, and on behalf of Campbell & Company, I would like to welcome you to Fundraising Communications 2, Donor Messages That Resonate, the second webinar in our free Fundraising Communications series. Thanks for joining us today. Before we begin today's presentation, I'd like to quickly go through some logistics for those of you who may be new to our webinars. First, please close any programs other than GoToWebinar that are running on your computer. Next, we recommend calling in with a telephone instead of using your computer speakers. Thirdly, please move your cell phone away from your computer. And if you experience visual issues, please send a chat to Campbell & Company or contact GoToWebinar at the number on your screen. Today's webinar will last 60 minutes, and you'll earn one continuing education credit that is good with your participation with CFRE International. Within the next 24 hours, you will receive an email from GoToWebinar that includes information on how to download your certificate. In that same follow-up email, you'll also receive a link to download today's slides along with a link to the recording. We do welcome questions throughout the webinar, so please use the question box in the GoToWebinar control panel that should be on the right side of your computer screen. We will also hold time at the end of the webinar for Q&A. And with that, I'd like to turn it over to Andy Brommel, Director of Communications Consulting.
Thanks, Emily, and thank you everyone for logging in today and joining us for this webinar. I'm Andy Brommel. I am Director of Communications Consulting for Campbell & Company, which means that I lead our communications team, which is one of the service lines of the firm. It's like a little special forces unit within the firm that really focuses on case development, fundraising communications, campaign branding, message coaching and training. You know, all of our work really orbits around the core of fundraising communications, and really everything that we do begins with a focus on messaging. We're a little obsessed with it. It's kind of every project really starts from a deep engagement with messaging. So today's session is frankly, it's my favorite of the ones that we do. And we're really just going to try to show you exactly how we on our team approach donor messaging, some of the tricks and approaches that we use in our client work every day to take an organization's case or the ideas they're trying to express and distill those into clear, powerful messages. This is part of our Fundraising Communications webinar series, which we created to address some of the challenges that we see organizations facing. And it starts from the recognition that fundraising is communications. It's finding an audience and communicating a message to them that inspires them to take action. It's really at the heart of it. That's what it is. If you took the communications out of fundraising, all you're left with is, the database and some recognition tchotchkes or something. So it really is communications. Every fundraiser is a communicator in some way, but most of you don't have the time or the support or the resources to really help you in your communications roles. Most of you never get a day to step back from your other responsibilities and really think about, what is your case for support? How do you communicate it? How do you personally, communicate it in your own voice? How do you practice communicating it? That always gets squeezed out. So most folks just don't really have the time to really focus on this. But we do, so we created some webinars. And this is a series that we do every year. This year, we're going to do 4 sessions that build on each other, although it's fine if you didn't see the first one. They're all on our YouTube channel, so go check those out. The first one is really about clarifying what you're trying to say with your case for support. This one is about how you say it most powerfully in clear messaging. The next one is about how you help your volunteers get comfortable saying it in their own words. That's going to be led by 2 of my colleagues, Christina Black and Tina Yoon, who are just amazing on that topic. So look forward to that one. The fourth one in the series is really about how you do all of this in a campaign setting. And there's going to be a secret 5th Fundraising Communications webinar that's all about visioning and the visionary level of communications. That's not announced yet, but keep an eye out for it. A couple of my colleagues and team members are gonna do a great topic on that. So the point of all of this is to help you get more effective, more comfortable, and confident in expressing your organization's philanthropic message. As Emily mentioned, we'd love for you to ask questions. We'll have time for this at the end, and look forward to those. All right, you knew this was coming. The first section is, what is a message? What are we even talking about here? This word gets used in a lot of different ways, like, what was the message of that movie? Or, will this candidate's message resonate with Iowa voters? I'll message you with the details. It's a word with a lot of meanings. I want to use it for today in a really specific way, that a message is a simple expression of an idea that is designed to move an audience. So we're not talking about the broader sense of, what is the moral of the story or the overall meaning of a text. We're talking about a small, like a unit of communication, like a bite-sized piece of communication or information that's driven by a central idea that has to be simple and that has a purpose with respect to an audience, whether that's inspiring them to action or engaging them, convincing them of something, changing their understanding, getting them to a new level of comprehension. That's really what we're talking about. So they're like little building blocks of communications. So some examples, simple messages from the nonprofit sector. Alzheimer's disease is the defining public health challenge of our time. Simple, one idea. This one is really trying to sort of educate or convince you of a view about what is important. No child should miss out on a great education for financial reasons. Simple statement. It's our turn to invest in the future of our school. Again, these are just little building blocks of an argument. Some of them are more emotional, some are more rational, some are more moralistic or idealistic. They work on different registers, but there's little units of communication. So our challenge is really how to build these, how to make a case out of them, how to communicate them to donors. So what do these little messages do? What are these little distilled units of communication? Let's go a little deeper in how they work. Messages structure thought. That's what they're trying to do. They're not just trying to give you information about an issue or a topic or something. They're trying to shape how you view that issue. So the best examples here come from politics. No one in this country should work full-time and still live in poverty. Simple message that happens to come from, I believe it's Elizabeth Warren. You could imagine many folks saying that. On the right, that government is best, which governs least. Reach back a little bit for this one. That's Henry David Thoreau from Civil Disobedience. So what you see is these aren't just like giving you information or giving you a unit of like content or something. They're trying to shape how you view something. They're inviting you into a kind of a worldview. And this part's really important. They're operating on the level of your values and your identity. You feel like something about who you are as a person is being kind of recruited into these by these messages. It's trying to pull at some part of you and get you to think about yourself and the world in a specific way. It's not all just politics. We see this in marketing, commerce, retail as well. So I want to share this. This is probably the most effective marketing message there's ever been. So going way back, it's hard to remember because probably none of us were alive. But there was a time, actually a long time in human history, when marriage didn't require a diamond ring. Those two things were not connected. But these folks at De Beers introduced and sustained this message and a series of messaging over many, many years, and just kind of rewrote all of our brains so that now we all walking around in the world just equate the idea of lifetime marital commitment with this specific type of rock that they happen to sell. It's convenient. So this is a message, simple message, that has structured how we all think about something that's, again, very personal, it's in your life. It's on the level of your values, your identity, how you think about the most important commitments in your life. Messages get in there and shape that. So that's the power of this. Meanwhile, over in the nonprofit sector, I got to say, most organizations really struggle to articulate clear, simple messages. There are a lot of reasons for this. I think culturally, we're maybe a little allergic to things that feel promotional and salesy. We're all extremely earnest. We're all, the sector as a whole is very educated. It's very professionalized. Everybody's got a master's degree, and we want badly to be taken seriously alongside, we want to be taken as seriously as business, as seriously as government. We don't want to just be this nice to have sector over here. So we try to talk in this very serious, substantive way where we say too much with not enough of a clear message. Also, most of these organizations have very limited marketing resources. You're focused on your mission. You're usually underinvesting on marketing and communications, so you tend to underdo the work of distilling a really clear message. And what I want to point out is, that's all very understandable, but it means that we miss an opportunity to structure thought, to shape how people see and understand our organizations. Next point about what messages do. They activate values and identity. We've already touched on this. The best, and the reason it's important, is that the best way to persuade someone of something new, whether that's a new idea or changing their behavior, getting them to start giving, to give more, to consider a gift in a campaign that they would never give automatically. The best way to persuade someone of something new is, before you get into the rational and emotional persuasion, is to start by speaking to their values and identity. That's where it's very hard to convince people of things. It's like almost impossible. But when it works, it's usually because you spoke to some sense of who they are as a person and then built from there. So, there's rational persuasion, there's emotional persuasion. Both of those can bring in values and identity, and both are much more powerful when you start from there. So here's an example from an imaginary educational opportunity program in a city. So one thing you might want to communicate here is the idea that every dollar we invest in this program generates $10 of social benefit and economic impact. You've done some work on this. You've got this study. You're really excited about this point because look at this proves, right? This proves how valuable we are. As soon as we show the donors this, they're all going to be on board. This isn't quite a message yet because it's like a good point and it could support a message. It could be like a supporting point, underneath a message, but it's not exactly saying exactly where it wants to move you to as the audience. Remember, it's a statement designed to move an audience. Where is this trying to take you? So let's think about how we could make this into a message by speaking to values and identity. And interestingly, you could go a few different directions with this. So I could imagine, it really depends on who your audience is. I could imagine an audience where the message is really speaking moralistically about values and what your sense of fairness is and kind of, are we good people? Is this a good community? Are you a good person? Am I a good person? So the message is, no child should miss out on a great education for financial reasons. And, somewhere in support of that you say, and it's not just, a good thing to do, it's also smart because every dollar has this great ROI. So that point could support this very moralistic kind of argument about fairness. Let's say your audience is more of like a business audience with more of an investment mindset. The message could be that this is the smartest investment we can make in our future today. So this sounds more cold and rational, but there's still values and identity in here. The identity that this is calling forward is for a donor or a prospective donor who wants to think of themselves as like the smart money in the room. Like, there's a lot of all these do-gooders, all kinds of good causes. I'm the person who knows how to make the really smart investments that yield the most impact. And the satisfaction I get from that is not just knowing I did a good thing, but knowing that I did it in a really smart way. So again, the same point would then come in support of this. And you could do this in any different direction depending on your audience. You could imagine like a religious audience where the message begins from, what our sort of tradition and values and faith calls on us to do. The point is, messages are really effective ways to focus on who your donor is, what is their sense of identity and values that you want to pull forward, and speak to that. Finally, what messages do, they make things simple. And the exercise we love to do here is, we would do this with boards and staff in different points in a project. Ask folks around you to just pick an organization that you support and ask them, why do you give money to them? And I like to do this at the beginning of a case development process or workshop before we're about to go a million miles deep into our organization and why it's so great. Because when you ask people this question, even when you're talking to really sophisticated nonprofit professionals who think about giving all day, the reasons that they give you for their own behaviors are very simple. They'll say, I really feel like reproductive rights are under attack right now, and I want to protect those rights for people in my community. Or, as I've gotten more involved with this food bank, I've learned that hunger is a way worse problem in our community than most people realize. And this food bank not only feeds people, but it helps them find a path out of poverty. Or, what's really cool about this urban farm program is that it both, it grows healthy food for communities that need it, and it creates job opportunities and skills for people who the job market overlooks. So it's this great way to take on two important social issues at once in this really smart way. When you ask people this question, you get short, simple answers that come from their heart and come from their sense of themselves, and you can see a ton of who they are in how they respond. So the question is, if people can only remember, 3 or 4 or 5 things, if their version of you is very simple, then how do we shape what those 3 or 4 or 5 things are? How are we communicating in a way that gives them those 3 or 4 or 5 core messages to tell themselves and to tell others about their support? How do we speak to those? This is, and so when you look at kind of the before and after of, this is where you see a disconnect in how organizations communicate and how people talk about their giving. So, on the sign here, I have some just sort of like almost like algorithmically generated higher ed copy. I'm sorry, I like to dunk on higher ed a little bit because these are the folks who have far and away the most marketing and communications resources of anyone in the sector, and what they largely want to do with that is communicate a lot of kind of like replaceable things about leadership and excellence. So, I get it. I understand there's a lot of reasons that we end up in this place, but I think, we talk too much about the things that we think are important. When you ask someone about why they give to a college, they'll say something very elemental and simple. Like, this college changed my life and I want other young people to have the same experience. So if we're talking in our language, are we talking past why people care? And are we missing a chance to really, all right, just a second. We've got like an auto thing that obviously hadn't detected any movement in this room for the last 20 minutes. I'll have to keep an eye on that. Anyway, you see the point. So messages make things simple. This is why I like, again, really simple messages like Alzheimer's disease is the defining public health challenge of our time, or it's our turn to invest in the future of our school. Really simple ideas. A good test is, can you imagine someone saying it? Can you imagine someone remembering it? Could you imagine someone passing it along word of mouth to someone else? And I think these little simple statements get to that place. You could not imagine someone remembering and passing this copy along in a conversation with their peers. There's no word of mouth power for this, but these elemental simple things can do that. So before we move on, just a couple clarifying points that come up when we talk about messaging. The distinction between having a really clear message and having really substantive communications. Because when you start talking about boiling everything down to 3 or 4 or 5 points, you wonder, but am I going to lose all the good substance of my communication? So messaging does not replace substance. It brings structure to the substance, and it makes your information more intelligible and memorable. So here's how we see that bringing structure. On the left, you see what might be sort of a standard food bank case statement language in fully fleshed out form. there's a lot of good substance here, but no one obviously could just skim this and remember it. The work you're doing is first distilling that down into 5 core messages, which you see in the red column here, and then you can still bring in all your substance. All your substance then is sort of, bracketed underneath that. So it's almost like you're taking everything you're trying to say and putting it into an outline, and then looking at what is the top layer of that outline. What are the key things that help organize and bring hierarchy and structure to all the other supporting information. So again, yeah, it's not taking away from the substance. It's actually just figuring out what is actually the structure of what you're trying to communicate. Another thing we come across is what's the difference between mission and message? Because these are related. Here's how we draw that line. Mission is speaking to an internal audience. Messaging is how you translate that for an external audience. Mission is about defining your organizational purpose as precisely as possible. And the message is really how you express that and invite other stakeholders to come be a part of it. Your mission needs to be useful to internal stakeholders and guiding their decisions. The external message is really about meeting people where they are, whatever level of understanding they have, bringing them in. So they need to be compatible. They need to be pointing in the same direction, but they're not the same. They don't need to use the same vocabulary. They're 2 parts of a kind of a communications sequence in a way. And this is really what we're building up towards. That strong, well-defined messages are the building blocks of a strong case. This is why our team, we don't write a lot of really traditional, long narrative case statements anymore. What we do with organizations is work through a process to distill core messages and then build out various executions and print pieces and collateral and everything else from those core messages. So this is why, if you attended the last webinar, you'll remember, maybe, that I described your case for support as the set of messages that you communicate to prepare prospects for a solicitation. So it's right there in the first line. It's a set of messages. And once you have those core messages, we showed this in the last webinar as well, once you have those messages, you can run those out across all of your different channels. All that stuff becomes so much easier when you have real clarity and confidence around your core messages. Oh, and it's probably the cheapest way to make all your fundraising communications more effective. Taking some time to distill messaging, it takes time. It doesn't necessarily take money. Anything you're going to put into print, any email you're going to send, they don't cost more. Good messaging brochures don't cost more than bad messaging brochures. It's just a matter of taking the time and putting that work in, seeing that value across all your different communications. Okay, so that's our case for why messages matter. Talk a little bit about how we make them. Okay, this is where we turn the corner from like thinking mode into writing mode, and this is where, the reason these are. I'm just going to show you some of the tips and tactics and the kind of tricks that our team does. Our team mostly comes from a writing background. Our hiring process is all driven by a writing test. That's really kind of where we're coming from. So these are mostly writing tips, but what you find, as with all kinds of writing, any kind of writing, is that the work of writing is the work of thinking. So when you are trying to write something better, you have to make the actual idea more clear and strengthen the idea. So this is going to be a bunch of examples with a before and an after. So the first tip is to just be as direct as possible. So let's say that this is your core sentiment. Alongside our recent investments in capital and programs, we must also invest in our school endowment to ensure our strongest future. So you can see what this is trying to say. It's saying we've already made important investments in our buildings and our faculty and programs. Now it's time for the endowment to be the thing that we focus on. So what's the most direct, punchy way to say that? We pushed on this for a while and then landed on the endowment is the most important investment we can make in our school's future right now. This is the version on the right is the version that you can imagine a board member saying to a peer. This is the version that you would want, everyone around your campaign or whatever this fundraising initiative is. This is the version you would want to be transmitting by word of mouth. You want everyone to come around to the view that this is the most important thing for us to do right now. So if that's what we want people to understand, that's what we should say. We should take a direct run at what we're trying, where we're trying to move the audience to. Another good way to know when you've got a message right underneath your nose is to try to recognize or remember what was the aha moment where you started to understand that thing, or you saw someone start to understand it. So let's start with this. For nearly a century, the big umbrella funder has supported thousands of nonprofit organizations across our city. Now, as we work to take on the most challenging issues in our community, we're preparing to launch a new strategy that brings partner organizations together to tackle problems at the neighborhood level. Again, this is perfectly fine writing. There's nothing wrong with it. It's very clear, expository writing. What they're saying is that we're going from what we used to do is sprinkle money across all the different nonprofits in the community. Now we're pivoting to a focus where we pick issues and organize around them at the neighborhood level, find all the organizations that touch that issue, and bring them together. So it's a big strategic shift in how this organization works. But it's a little bit wonky. So we found potentially two core messages that were kind of buried in this. One is that if the problems are interconnected, we need interconnected solutions. We're talking about things like health disparities, employment, unemployment, housing issues, all the issues that kind of operate together in a community and to hold it back. You can't go pick those off one at a time. The problems are all connected, so it's only really a fair fight if we have interconnected solutions. Again, it's like a little aha, kind of gives you a sense of, oh, that's the core idea here. The other one that's kind of reflected in this is, why are we focusing on neighborhoods? Our new citywide strategy is based on neighborhoods because they're big enough to matter, yet big enough to truly matter, yet small enough to truly change. There's a strategic insight there that, neighborhoods is the right level to focus on because it's big enough to matter, but small enough to actually get our hands around and make change. So these were the two core messages that we found kind of just underneath the surface in this longer communication. Another way to think about this is to look for what's the strongest version of what you're saying that's just up to the edge of credibility and as bold as you can be without going beyond the truth. So this is from a hospital that we worked with. This is a safety net hospital that's been doing very, very cool, sophisticated things in population health, community health, basically preventative health, taking care of their community, not just helping people when they come into the hospital. And this was about 10 years ago, around when healthcare reform was the topic of the day. So healthcare reform is bringing a new focus on prevention, community health, and affordability. And for decades, we've been a leader in these critical areas. So this is kind of like the institution's version of saying this. Like, there's all these things you've heard of. We've been a big leader in these. We want you to know that. This is us sort of pushing our kind of credential at you. What we realized the core message could be here is that American healthcare is now going where we've always been. Like, the things you hear about, we are already there. And the fact that, we have a leadership position because we've been doing this work for decades. So again, it was like the strongest, boldest version of the kind of flatter expression at that point. A lot of times what you do in this work is you just take something and you just keep pushing on it over and over and over again until it's very simple. So this was from a school campaign that was raising money for athletics facilities, a performing arts center that would support things like their debate and speech programs and their theater program. But this campaign was not going to touch any of their classrooms or core academic, like their academic core. They're trying to figure out how do we make that feel like a strength instead of kind of a gap or a hole in the campaign. So the initial version was, We've always been recognized for our outstanding academic programs, yet we know that our extracurricular and co-curricular programs can be just as important in shaping our children's lives. So again, this is kind of the flat version. You can see what it's saying. When we pushed on it, we got it to, this campaign is about all the learning that happens outside the classroom. So now you're going back and you're thinking about, you're inviting people to think about when you were in high school. What were the things that actually changed your life? It is very likely that it was, a coach on a team, or your experience in athletics, or being in the debate club, or, discovering that you really love being in the musical. Like, so much of what changes people's lives happens outside the classroom. And this campaign is about really investing and elevating all of that. So again, you just take something and keep pushing on it until you get to the simplest possible core. This one's close to my heart. I feel like this is half the work that we do, is just taking text from organizations and trying to figure out how an actual human would say it. So let's start with, no child should grow up in a food insecure household. Okay, this is a bit of a pet peeve of mine from working in this mission space, and I get it. Like, the food insecurity is the right technical language for the issue that it describes. This is jargon has a purpose. Its purpose is to allow professionals within a field to communicate accurately with each other. So, I'm not trying to rid the world of jargon. We just can't say that in our outside voices when we're speaking to civilians and, the outside world. Jargon is for professionals within a community to talk to each other. Like when I talk to you about case development, that's fundraising jargon that that I know. But when I talk to somebody outside of our world about the work that I do, I say I help nonprofits figure out how to, tell their stories and get their message out there. I don't say I help them develop their case for support. So, food insecurity is the correct way of understanding the issue. It is just from a rhetorical standpoint kind of a disaster. So there's different ways you could go with this. It may be that you just focus on the kid. No child should go to school hungry. That brings an image to your mind. You could imagine a person saying it. This version does feel like it's kind of pulling at your identity and values. Or maybe no parent should have to worry about where their child's next meal will come from. So now this one focuses a little bit more on the parent, conveys the sense of like it's about the household, not just about the kid. So either of these could be the right message, could be the right way of framing it, but they're speaking in human terms. You could imagine a person saying this. The other way to think about this is just nouns and verbs. When you start to do this work more and more, you find yourself starting to hate adjectives, which is unexpected because they are an important part of speech. But let's say, but everywhere they show up in our writing, they tend to be making it frequently weaker and worse. So this is the kind of thing you see a lot in education. We offer a child-centered, transformational, holistic education. And, I could have run this out to like 14 different adjectives that, just basically come out of the algorithm in writing about education. One test we like to do is, what if you just take out the adjectives? So child-centered, that's functioning as an adjective. It's like a noun phrase. Transformational, holistic. So if you take those out of the sentence, the core of this sentence, the like chassis of this sentence is, we offer education. And if you're, like the sentence will never be more powerful than that, because its basic action is, we offer education. And then we're like pouring some adjective syrup on that to try to make it taste better, but it doesn't really work. So here's a noun and verb version. We give every child every chance to discover who they can become. You could imagine this going many different ways. You could have, whether you focus more on, this is kind of like taking the transformational part and turning it into a noun and verb sentence. You could imagine different versions of this coming off of this same original version. But, nouns and verbs. See what you can do with a sentence that has a subject and a predicate. Just like we all learned back in elementary school, it turns out it was useful, and it is here to save you now. Okay, this is another one that we think about a lot. do not build one of these. What is this? It's a futon. It's a terrible bed combined with a terrible couch. This is something that does two things poorly instead of doing one thing well. So the idea here is when you're doing messaging work, you need to have one idea per message. When you find yourself trying to shoehorn 2 or 3 things in, especially if you're in an editing process and you have feedback coming in from a whole committee of people, you're trying to get everybody's ideas in there, this is how you end up with, like they say, like a camel is a horse designed by a committee. But we're mixing metaphors. Let's stick with our futon. So here's our futon version of talking about an annual fund. The annual fund provides funding that supports a wide range of initiatives, including financial aid, faculty professional development, new program innovation, technology, and equipment. So the reason this isn't a message is that it's trying to do too many things at once. And so when you see this, you get some information, but you don't get it does not structure how you think about the annual fund. It's just kind of saying, here's some info. So when you try to push this and figure out what is the one idea at the center of it, what's interesting is that you actually have to make some decisions. So it might be, when you look at this list of things, it's usually a good giveaway that you don't have a message yet if there's a list in it, because a list is not a message. It could be that what this list of things is trying to add up to is the idea that annual fund gift, it benefits every student every day. And we see that because, so the stuff on the left, you can still say, but you say it after the message. It is in support of or in expansion of the message. So maybe the core idea here is every student every day. That's what the annual fund is about. Maybe it's about really speaking more to the fact that, your annual fund gift supports all the things we love most about our school. The reason you chose this school, the reason you came here, the annual fund invests in those people, programs, places, everything that we love about our school. This is a direct investment. Maybe that's the point. The message could also be, just very simple, it's the most important gift you can make to benefit our students today. Maybe that's what you're trying to say, is just, especially if this is running during a campaign when people are confused about what's my annual fund versus the campaign. Is it, if I make a campaign gift, do I still have to make my annual fund gift? So in that setting, you want to be actively communicating your annual fund gift is the first most important gift we need to make to benefit our students today. And maybe your campaign gift is a special gift that you make to benefit, the school tomorrow or something. So any one of these might be the message from this original kind of futon sentence. But you have to kind of do the work to figure out what it is you're trying to say. Part of this discipline is really trying to get out of your own view of the world and remember that you, as the staff person, have a very particular viewpoint. You are there 9 to 5, probably more, every day. You are looking from the inside out, and you are awash in information from the organization around you. And once you are in that place, it's really difficult and maybe a little bit impossible to kind of try to go back to how the organization looked and felt to you before you knew all that stuff. So you're like the pilot of the plane with I don't even know what all this stuff is, but it's all this information coming at you, all this knowledge, whereas the audience is more like the passengers. What are they thinking about? They think, they're not looking at the gauges. What they care about is, is it going to be fast? Is it going to be safe? Was the experience going to be, well, it's air travel, so the experience is going to be bad, but is the experience going to be acceptable bad or super bad? And can I afford it? People's view of your organization is more on that level. So think about, when you're communicating, am I trying to sell the airplane or am I selling the journey, the thing that people actually buy? I want to get somewhere and go somewhere. Where is this going to take me? So how do we find messages? How do we do, it can seem like there's sometimes an element of magic in doing messaging work where, we're showing these before and afters and things are transformed from the bad version to the better version. There's no magic, and really the key is to listen and pay attention. So a good place to start in making messages is to listen to how your donors and board members talk to you about your organization, your mission, your cause, and about themselves. So these are the kinds of questions that we ask when we're coming in as consultants to do this work. We ask very simple questions. We ask, why have you been so involved? We ask, why would you consider giving to this organization? What is your vision? What would you like to see this organization do over the, if you can imagine 5 to 10 years from now? We ask people very simple questions, and then we look in their answers for where was the energy? Where did people seem to be leaning in or getting sometimes emotional? Where did you feel a connection with them in that conversation? What did they tell you about themselves, their identities, and values? And what would it look like to start the communication from there and then go from there to all the things that we want to talk about, but really meeting someone where they are? So messaging feels like it's about writing, but really it's the real core of it is about listening. This is a framing that we use a lot. Messaging should feel like a pull and not a push. And keep this, I want you, go around your organization or your world the rest of this week and look at things that are written and see if it feels like it is pushing something at you or pulling something forward from you. So here's the push version. For 25 years, we have led the climate conversation in our state, built strong partnerships with organizations and legislators, and created a model for other states. So you can see why this is an important thing for someone to understand if you're about to ask them for $1 million. There are a lot of ways they can make a difference in that mission space. There are a lot of organizations working on it. You do have to make a case for why should you invest your climate, focused dollars with us. So the fact that we want to get people there makes us kind of want to push them there by saying, here, you need to know these things about us and why we're so great. This is the pull version. If you care about our climate, this is the smartest way to make a difference today. Because when you invest with us, it goes out through a whole network of partnerships and organizations. It adds up to more than the sum of the parts. Because we are in this convening position where we can amplify and multiply the impact of your gift by working with all these partners across the state. You're someone who cares about this. We know how much you want to make change and make a difference. We think this is the smartest way to make a difference. And this might remind you of one of the things from early in the presentation about there's an identity here, which is the word is smart. Smart is the identity word here. This is for, we see this a lot in environmental organizations. There are people who come to those missions because they want the good fight, and there are people who come because they want smart solutions, and there are people who come because they want to preserve nature, and it's on a more religious or spiritual level of just communing with nature. All these different identities operate around the exact same set of missions and programs, and it's kind of your job or our job as communicators to understand who's our audience, what is the message that speaks to them, what are their identities around this. Okay, so just briefly, once you've done this kind of disciplined work to develop messages, what do you do with them? So first, what messages do you need? This is a callback to the first webinar in the series where we look at your case in terms of 6 different elements. These are kind of like the 6 ingredients that get mixed together in different recipes, but kind of any complete case for support typically has some combination and fusion of these kinds of information. So a first way of thinking about this, sometimes we actually do this, we'll just do our messaging work by saying, what are the context messages? What are the impetus messages? What are the visionary messages? And it's maybe one message, one core message for each of these 6, or sometimes there's 2 or 3. And we just figure that out. And it kind of, when you do that, you're adding up to the why someone should care, what we're trying to do, and who is going to come together to make this change. So this can be a good place to start. Think about what messages do you need and what are your best messages in each of those categories. And again, once you have them, you want to start all of your communications from your messaging. So when you're sitting down to write an annual appeal or an email blast or whatever, you're thinking, what is, and if it's an annual ask, you're not going to have room for 6 messages or some like the full encyclopedic version of your case that goes to a major donor. You're going to be thinking, what's the lead message, the most important message, and what is maybe 2 other supporting messages that I can get out there in this annual appeal. Coaching your leadership to express your case. Once you've done the work to distill messages, and we'll talk about this a lot in the next webinar. If you want to be a hero to your board, don't give them a beautifully produced, 30-page brochure that you've poured your heart and soul and like $20,000-$30,000 into. Give them a 1-pager that breaks your case down into simple talking points. Then they will thank you. They will be so relieved that they have, because when they see 30 pages, they think, I can't possibly tell this story. When they see 1 page of clear messages, they think, I can do this. I believe these things. I can put these things in my own words. I can connect these to my stories. So this is a lot of the examples that we've shared today come from campaigns. Some of them come from annual funds. Some of them are just sort of general organizational brand messaging, and that's intentional. Messaging doesn't belong to any one of those areas. It's really a discipline about communications that, once you start kind of doing this, you are then developing a message-driven case for support. Your campaign can be built around messages. You could have messages for your organization, messages for your campaign, and if you have 3 projects within that campaign, each campaign project can have its own little set of messages. Like here's the 4 things you need to know about why we need to build a new gym. So it can operate on a big picture level, down at the project level. It's very helpful for presentations, for events, for emails. I mean, when you think about it, most of the writing we do every day is just writing emails to each other. So even when you're trying to write an email to your boss, you're like, what's my message here? It can help you in your interpersonal professional communications. So this is the gospel of messaging. This is why we're obsessed with this. This is why we spend so much time thinking about this. It's powerful on every level, and it will change your life once you get into the discipline. So we've got time for questions, and Emily, I don't know if we have any.
We have one so far. What type of messaging tips do you have for annual giving initiatives to ensure that potential donors understand that the annual fund is not just a big black hole?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I would love to invite other folks to ask questions while we have this time together. Okay, yeah. So this is a challenge with annual funds. People view them as undifferentiated, unrestricted slush funds, and there we go again. So part of the problem here might actually be structural. You may be in a changing donor environment where it actually is just important for you to really think about giving people more opportunities to restrict their gifts or to designate their gifts, and give them designation and restriction options that won't tie your hands too much. So part of beginning with your donors where they are and trying to sort of pull them forward versus pushing what you want toward them may be that you actually have to concede to their view. I mean, they may actually really be much more ready to give to you if they feel like there is a clearer sense of agency for them in making an impact and choosing the area. So depending on your mission, you may actually just need to go meet them where they are and offer the designation. But I think this is where it becomes really important to be able to tell a story about your annual fund that shows impact. And the test for this I like is, can you picture it in your head? Annual funds and endowments, which is funny, they're like at the complete different ends of the spectrum of sort of types of giving, but they both suffer from this problem that most donors struggle to picture it in their head. What does it actually do? And if they can't picture it visually, like there's a little movie playing in their head, then they don't really get it. So think about how your messaging could show what your how an annual fund gift, changes a student's experience or launches a program or makes it possible to say yes to something that you would otherwise have to say no to, that's like a good idea that you would want to do. Think about how you tell a story with people, places, actions, programs that has action in it, and where annual fund dollars are the crucial additive element, or the crucial element. So that would be my guidance, is to try to find the version of that is vivid in the sense that you can picture it, and really think about how you understanding what your donors are saying and whether they may actually need some kind of designation option.
Great.
Emily, do we have any?
Relating to that, we do. And relating to that, what message would you send for a planned gift, making sure you don't cannibalize the annual fund?
Okay. We've done some planned giving projects over the last few years, and it's been interesting to really focus on that specific set of decisions. So the distinction you probably want to draw, and this you have to start with understanding your strategy. I mean, frankly, depending on who you are and where you are, you may be much more concerned about securing a really significant planned gift versus, the annual. This may or may be more or less of a problem depending on your situation. But I would look to draw the distinction between today and tomorrow. That the annual fund is about making a difference today in a way that you feel the benefit of that right now. And again, like we were just saying, like give people messaging that helps them feel good about that gift right now and feel that that's like in the present moment. And then look at your planned giving messaging in terms of, and this is where, obviously people talk a lot about legacy and do a lot of legacy-focused messaging. I think, you're thinking more about this is ensuring you can continue to have that impact far into the future, that we can always be making that difference on your behalf. You can always be supporting the people that we serve, the causes that you care about, for years and years and years into the future. The other thing to think about with planned giving messaging is that, with planned giving, you are asking to be a part of their family in a way that is just unique among all the other kinds of. You're asking to be in their estate plans, where it's you and the family. You're trying to get into that group. So often you do need to go to a very personal level, reflecting on why someone has what has been meaningful in their life, and how you are asking and offering to be a steward of the things that they have valued most in their life, and to carry that forward for them beyond the end of their life. So yeah, the messaging, the register can be very different, because you're really you're speaking on a very deeply personal level.
Thank you. Our next question is, what advice do you have to help guide staff and volunteers beyond fluff messaging versus messaging showing clear impact and difference?
So yeah, messaging needs to feel pretty substantive, and I think testing messaging with your staff and your volunteers is a great way to reality test. Do people feel that this is substantive and real and useful versus just kind of promotional blandness? So a lot of that is really thinking about the messaging itself needs to have content. And the examples that we've shown, a lot of them are fairly rhetorical in the sense that they're constructed we're trying to construct them in ways that are sort of elegant or clever or have some rhetorical impact, using writing techniques. But if it's not carrying a payload of a pretty important idea, like Alzheimer's disease is the defining public health challenge of our time, like that's not a fluff statement. That is a proposition that people could argue either side of. It's our turn to invest in the future. future of our school. There's a content to that that's speaking to moral responsibility. Every generation, past and present, has invested in this school. The reason the school your kid goes to is great is because of those past generations. Now it's our turn. So that has, it's a rhetorical statement, but it has a payload of an important idea. So you really do need to look at messaging that's not just, it doesn't just sound good, but that it's carrying an important idea. And the thing you want to be, when you're putting that in the hands of your volunteers, sometimes the rhetoric will turn them off because they'll say, well, I couldn't picture myself saying it in quite that same super concise way or way that sounds better in writing than out loud. So what you want to be saying to them is, you don't need to use these words. You can say it in your words, but we want you, if you're out there talking to donors, your job as a spokesperson, we just want you in that conversation to hit on 3 or 4 or 5 of these messages, put them in your own words, talk about it in the way that's comfortable to you, but go out there and put these ideas out there for us and invite people in your conversations to these ideas. You don't have to be attached to the words. I hope that's helpful. I think, it does need to be substantive, but and we spend a lot of time thinking about the wording, but then you have to kind of let go of that when you put it in volunteers' hands.
Thank you. And I think we have time for one last question. Do you have any tips about how to elegantly pivot your messaging mid-year because of emerging issues?
Okay. Yeah. I'm not sure that the fundamental discipline or task that presents you with is necessarily different. It probably means you need to go and do this all again from a fresh set of realities or circumstances. I guess the question that raises for me is, do you need to account for the change? And do you need to sort of explain and make a claim for why you're asking for people's attention in a new and different way? And that will really depend on, we work with a lot of Planned Parenthood affiliates, and, they are constantly moving back and forth between their kind of eternal forever message about protecting reproductive rights and freedoms, and then also being very responsive to, needing to be extremely responsive to bills and political initiatives and just things that happen very day to day. So they're constantly moving back and forth between kind of their eternal message and their day-to-day message. So it may be a matter of trying to draw that connectivity so it doesn't feel like, surprise, new messaging, everything's changed now. So it doesn't feel like whiplash. So I'd be looking for ways to connect your deeper messaging, your more static messaging to whatever the issue of the day is. And really make an account of, because we are committed to X, Y, and Z, because we serve our community in this way, we now have to really respond to this opportunity, this threat, this emerging issue, and here's how we're going to do that. So I feel like that's not a terribly specific answer, but I think if you're looking for ways to say what's always true, and along with what's true just in that moment. All right. Well, these are great questions, and thank you so much for sharing them. Thanks for spending time with us. As a reminder, we hope you'll come back for the rest of the series. The next session is all about volunteer messaging. We're going to do a lot of focus on message training and coaching, actual exercises, things you can do around that. And thank you so much. We welcome any further thoughts or questions by email. You see my short version of my email there on the screen, and we look forward to seeing you again in the future. Thanks, everyone.